This is my uncle's story. I'm sorry if it's poorly written. I wrote it down while he told me in real time. My name is Rick Martinez, and I am a retired truck driver. This happened when I was about 30 years old. I am now 62. On the road, I have seen many strange things. I've told this story over and over. A lot of people don't believe me. But it starts in Stockton, California, where I picked up a load of pipe. My destination was Salt Lake City, Utah. I was supposed to refuel in Barstow, California, at a truck stop. But lo and behold, they were out of fuel. So I told my supervisor, "Hey, I got like half a tank of fuel." He told me to continue and hit the first truck stop I saw. So 100 miles into Nevada, nothing but desert. See nothing but a sparsely lit desert with a couple of towns. When I noticed my gauge set was reading empty, and I'm thinking that's not right. So I took the first exit I saw and pulled over. Told my supervisor, who was right behind me an hour away, that I was afraid to continue on and run the tanks dry. So he told me to sit still, and he would be by in an hour, and we could siphon some of the fuel from his tanks into mine. So I sat there, and I noticed that it was a small town with sparse lighting. As I sat there, I couldn't run the engine, so I couldn't listen to the radio. So I sat there in silence. I don't do drugs, and I didn't make this up. So listen carefully. As I'm sitting there, I notice a lot of undone construction. A trailer park to my right, completely dark, and a church off to my left about a block away with its lights on. It's about 2 a.m., and I see this jackrabbit hopping around my truck. It hops around and just stares at me and keeps hopping around. So I'm getting hungry, and I notice what looks to be a convenience store another block away from the church. So I got off the truck and decided to walk to the store. While I'm walking, I keep hearing this dog howling like it's in pain. As I pass the church, the 2 doors are wide open, and I hear clapping like they're having services. As I pass the church, I look inside, and there's no one, except for this skinny white old man reading from the Bible and talking about hell. I don't linger too long and pass the church. Then I heard clapping again. About then, the dog starts howling again. I notice there's a bunch of empty houses on this street that goes uphill. I still am making my way towards what I think is a little mini-mart. All the time, the dog keeps howling. All the lights are on. As I go inside, this little old lady with glasses is reading a book. There's hardly anything in this store. Maybe a few cans of food, a couple of bags of chips, and only water in the refrigerators. The whole time, the lady didn't even pick her head up from the book. So I grab a water and grab chips. I'm hungry as help, and there's nothing to eat. So I ask the old lady, "Is this all you have? And where is everybody at?" She told me everybody moved out, and new construction was supposed to begin like 6 months ago. And she didn't say anything after that. So I paid her and walked out and started walking back towards the truck. The whole time, the dog is still howling. So, as I got closer to the church, I looked up the street towards where I heard the howling from. I decided to go see for myself why the dog was howling. Houses on both sides of the street are boarded up and dark. I saw a house with the lights on. It has about a 5-foot fence. When I looked over the fence, I was in shock. What I saw was a man in his underwear with a chain attached to his neck on all fours, howling. The hairs on my arms and neck stood up as I saw this other man burst through the back door and kick the man on all fours and was yelling at him to shut up. He ran into a doghouse. I was in shock and turned and ran back down the hill to my truck. As I passed the church, both doors are still wide open, but there are no lights on anymore, and still I can hear the clapping. Finally made it to my truck, called my supervisor and told him what I saw. Told him to hurry and get here so I can leave. My supervisor asked what exit you talking about, and I told him, and he said, "Oh, I passed that." He had to turn around and come back to get me. So I'm sitting there, and the rabbit is still hopping around my truck. It stopped and looked up at me as I was sitting in my truck. I'm not saying the rabbit said it, but this is what I heard. Leave. I rolled up the window and waited for my supervisor, who showed up 5 minutes later. I told my supervisor what happened, and he just laughed at me and told me I'm going to have to drug test you. I did not sleep on that whole trip to Utah until I got to Salt Lake City. Believe it or not, I swear this is what happened. So this happened back in 2019, around November 2nd, I believe. Also, this is 100% true, though I'm not sure if this was just a coincidence or what. So back in 2019, I was pretty much depressed the whole year. Not really suicidal, but let's just say I stopped wearing a seatbelt, smoked 2 times as many cigarettes as I would normally, and didn't care much about my well-being for the most part. Due to this depression and things getting worse mentally, I did a lot of dumb things, supernatural-wise. I've always known to not speak to the dead, knowing that when you speak to one spirit, the rest can hear you as well. I've always been extremely superstitious and believe in the paranormal, supernatural, 100%. Anyways, I live next to a huge cemetery and drive by it every day since it's right across from my neighborhood. Due to my superstitions and belief that the dead can do things us humans aren't capable of, each day I would scream out of the window when passing the cemetery, begging for one of the spirits to get me in a car accident. This habit started on November 2nd, I believe. So I did that each day while driving past the cemetery. Lo and behold, on November 6th, I was driving to work at about 4:30 a.m. I go the same way every day, and I was coming up to a red light. Out of nowhere, and I kid you not, this was literally out of fucking nowhere, I heard a loud honk from behind me and was rear-ended by one of those big white RG and E trucks that fix telephone poles and stuff. Since I was at the red light, it basically pushed my car forward into the middle of the intersection, and once again out of nowhere, I was T-boned by some random ass old man in a van with his wife. I was driving a 2005 Nissan Sentra at the time, and it was completely wrecked, literally demolished, and I had not one scratch on me at all. My knees were extremely bruised. I have no idea how that happened, but that was pretty much it. This also happened literally on the main road, coming out of my neighborhood about a mile down from the cemetery. There are never any cars this early in the morning. Maybe one, but even that's rare for the most part. Also, while I was talking to the old man, they lived in a town, literally 40 fucking minutes away, and were driving to the park. The whole story is so weird, and it honestly kind of creeps me out. But yeah, I was in an extremely bad financial situation also, and was stuck without a car for quite a bit. When I was driving by the cemetery begging to be in an accident, I meant that I wanted it to be fatal, so I think whichever spirit heard me, or whatever wanted to mess with me or something. I don't know. Take it as you will. Maybe this was an extremely weird coincidence, but if not, always remember to be careful what you wish for when speaking to the dead. To start out, you need a little backstory to show how I got into this situation. When I got out of high school around 2003, finding a job was difficult, so I took whatever horrible jobs I could to get by. When I found a job cleaning fire and water damage full-time, I was excited to have steady income and start saving, but this quickly turned into a nightmare that I had to endure for almost 2 years. The company I worked for put me on my first job, which was a water damage claim, where a basement flooded with sewage. So after a few days of work, we finished and it was on to the next job. My boss then called me into his office the next morning and told me about a special crew that he was setting up, and asked if I would be the crew leader, supervising 3 other guys that were just hired. I found this strange, as I'd only been working there a total of around 3 days, but figured my work ethic was already paying off, and I would get a raise. I only made $10 an hour to start. Not only did I not get the raise, but I got no training in the new position other than a work van with cleaning material, and the phone numbers for the 3 new guys that also were hired in to do fire water damage cleanup. The boss told me what tools were best to use and what cleaning products to use to sanitize, along with where everything was located in the van, with hazmat suits and respirators. But he was vague about what kind of things I would clean up. He just said the situations were always different, and I would get detailed instructions each job. He called my position CSC crew leader. The boss told me that I would never have to see the deceased, as the coroner would have the remains gone by the time my crew got there, and to use my logic to determine what needed to be removed from the homes and what could be cleaned. The first job I had in my new position, which the boss told me about when I got to the office, was cleaning up the remains of an elderly man or woman who died in their house and had been laying in chair. When we arrived, the coroner had me come inside to show me a few things that were considered hazardous material and needed to be removed due to the risk of disease. I guess my boss knew a few people from the county coroner's office, and much of the work came from their recommendations. Not only was the deceased still in the house, but was fully visible to me and the other guy, and you could smell the rot through the masks as the house had no AC, and this was mid-June. The coroner was backed up and waiting on additional people to show up to load the body as it was falling apart. And I call the body it because I honestly couldn't tell if it was male or female, and was trying not to look too long as it was disturbing. The other 3 guys I worked with handled it well, but 2 got sick from the smell and has to go outside to puke. We all waited outside after the coroner showed us the chair, the fluids that leaked into the carpet, and the basement where the fluids went through the subfloor and puddled on some boxes in the basement. The coroner's support arrived and took the deceased out, and me and the crew started working. After about 5 minutes, weird things started to happen. The first of which was when I began to disassemble the chair. I had removed the back of the chair and was putting it into the special hazmat bags that I was given, and the base started to rock when I was about 10 feet away, putting the bag with the back of the chair by the front door. Nobody else was in the same room as the other guys were in the basement, dealing with moving boxes. I brushed it off and took apart the base of the chair as much as I could, and when I got it into the bag, I got a chill up my back and then began feeling sick. I just figured it was the shock of what I was cleaning, hitting me and pushed on, even though the chill was strange, as I was very hot in full hazmat in June. Next was removing the carpet and assessing the floor to see if it would be able to be cleaned, or if I had to remove a section of the floor. So I called the boss to ask him, and he told me just to pour the special cleaner on the area to soak into the floorboards, and it would be fine. So I got it out of the truck where he said it was and brought it inside. When I got inside, all 3 of the guys in the basement were scrambling to get out of the basement, tripping over each other, and all 3 ran outside. When I asked them what was up, all 3 said there was someone in the cluttered basement, and they assumed it was a homeless person or junkie. Detroit has many issues with these kinds of things. I listened at one of the open windows to the basement. It's kind of the first thing we did when we started working. Open any window possible. Prop the doors open, so maybe someone got inside then, or possibly before we got there, and was hiding. After listening a few minutes and hearing nothing, me and another of the workers went inside, armed with a mag light and a piece of metal fence post, and searched the basement. Nothing was down there but the footprints of the shoe covers we used. But when we started up the stairs, we heard a horrible hacking cough from somewhere in the basement. When we looked for it, there was nothing, but the corner of the basement had a bunch of dust stirred up, like someone was moving things very recently that weirded us both out. We called the guys back in, and they got back to the boxes, but all of them kept feeling like they were being touched while throwing away material from the boxes that got fluids on them. I went back to my upstairs job, but found that the cleaner I put next to the floorboards was gone, and I started getting frustrated as it was the only jug I had of this cleaner. And I clearly remember it being set next to the area before the guys ran up the stairs and my attention was redirected. I began to take out trash, figuring I would find it eventually, or the basement guys took it for the floor, and I found it on its side, behind the bag that had the back of the chair. This is impossible. There were like 6 other bags in front of this one near the front door, and this was a gallon bottle of cleaner. Again, I got a chill, but this one was brought on by what sounded like a whisper that I could not make out the words to. Cleaned the floorboards and moved out trash. Job complete. That night, each member of my crew had a dream about an older man telling us that we are not welcome in his home, touching his belongings, and we need to leave. In my dream, I was alone in his house. The old man cried and told me I was destroying his things, and he couldn't replace anything. He was trying to push me out of his house, but it was like I was ignoring him, even when he would push me and scream at me. No reaction from me. He then threw my cleaner into the garbage pile I'd made by the front door, exactly where I found it. 2 of the 3 guys in the crew told me their dreams about the old man pushing them as they went through boxes of ruined pictures and other old stuff that needed to be thrown out due to the risk of disease from his fluids. They also said it was like they had no control and were on autopilot. They said they were so sad but couldn't do anything. The thing that got me about the dreams of the other 2 guys was they both said the man was getting so upset that he began violently coughing, and that the man kept grabbing their arms when they would touch boxes or throw things into the trash. Neither of the guys were in the house when me and the other guy heard the coughing from the basement. The guy that went into the basement with me said he had a dream, but all he remembered was waking up sad, like he did something wrong, and had a horrible coughing fit, which might just be a coincidence, but I connected it in my mind as relating to the other dreams. We all talked about it, and came to the conclusion that we were all just having a reaction to a situation, and it was nothing more than our brains coping with what we had to do. I'm very into psychology, so I rationalized it the best I could, and we hoped for better assignments the next day. Next few jobs were not so bad. Cleaning up blood at a home invasion. No casualty, but huge mess. Then there was a few other bloody crime scenes with casualties, but nothing notable happened. About 2 weeks into the job, we began to learn the tricks of the trade, and were split into 2 different groups that I was responsible to manage as crew leader, so I would have to go to different sites if the other 2 guys had an issue or didn't know what to do. I thought I was getting used to the job as well as the other guys, as we had no other experiences like the first job, but I was wrong. The next job that there was activity was a suicide of a man that was middle-aged. The coroner had already removed the body, but it was a mess. The guy had shot himself with what I think was a large caliber handgun or shotgun, as the spray was everywhere in the basement in like a second living room. There were skull fragments lodged in drywall, brain matter all over, and again, he was not found for a bit. So the smell was horrible. First step in cleaning this was using our backpack vacuum cleaner to suck up all the biomaterial. The coroner told us when we went in that he and his partner were extremely uneasy in the house, and it felt strange, and we immediately started getting a claustrophobic, suffocating feeling when we went into the basement as well. To make matters worse, The family of the man had came over and were crying upstairs, but the vacuum noise helped to cancel out that. While I was cleaning, the power to the lights went out, and it was completely pitch black. This was strange, because my vacuum was still powered. My crewmate started screaming at this point, so I turned off my vacuum and climbed off my ladder. I thought maybe he touched a wire to the lights, but when my vacuum unit was turned off, he was still screaming, and I could hear things being knocked over. I started fumbling around for my flashlight on my tool belt and yelled for my friend, asking what was going on. But all I got back was panicked, screaming. Then I saw in the pitch black something darker that was moving in my direction, and I will admit, I freaked out. I slipped, trying to back up, still looking in my belt for the flashlight, and found it when my back hit the basement wall. I turned on the light, aimed at the blackest shape I have ever seen, and when the light turned on, I saw the shape of a man wearing a flannel shirt, beard, and an expression like he was about to attack me. Then it was just gone. My crewmate was behind where the entity was, sitting on the floor rocking with his hands on his head. When I approached, he picked up his flashlight off the ground and turned it on, then ran up the stairs and outside and threw up. I followed behind him, asking if he was okay and why he was screaming. I thought I just imagined the entity and the man, because his screaming scared me. But he told me that he was scrubbing the wall and felt something pulling on something in his tool belt, and he thought it was me. But when he turned around, the lights went out, and he was engulfed by what he said was like dark smoke, and he immediately could not breathe and was struggling to move. He managed to pull his flashlight out, but it was knocked out of his hand, like his wrist was grabbed with force, and he managed to scream. When he screamed, trinkets started falling off an entertainment center that was about 3 feet to his side, and the black smoke moved back, but he was close to passing out from exertion. He also said he lost hearing and didn't know that any noise came out when he started screaming, and that the stuff falling off the shelves was landing on him, and that's why he was covering his head. He said it felt like a weight was lifted off him when the dark smoke backed up, but he felt sick right away, and the light from my flashlight made the sick feeling increase. We took an early lunch, where he just sat there, pale as ever, and didn't say much, other than he said he breathed in that smoke and didn't feel right. I got him some Gatorade, and his color started to come back. I never told him I saw a man when I turned on my light, because we still needed to finish, and I didn't want to put that in his head since he never mentioned seeing it. When we went back, the lights in the basement were on again. Half the things that fell from the shelves were back on the entertainment center, and the TV was on baseball. There was also a different smell in the room, similar to burnt hair. My worker stayed a half hour, got sick again and went home for the day, leaving me alone to finish, which I didn't want to do but had to, as the other guys had their own job. After cleaning up everything with my vacuum, I began scrubbing the old blood, which is hard after it congeals. Mix in brain matter and it is like glue, even with cleaner. While I was finishing up, I kept seeing the shape of a person always in the side of my vision. Each time I would smell that strange burnt hair scent. And a few times I also felt like a force was pulling at items on my belt. Not sure what item, as there were several things in my belt. When I finished the job, I went to use the bathroom upstairs and in the hallway. Along the way, I heard like muffled crying or moaning. I froze up and stayed still, thinking maybe a family member had came back, and when I panned around, there was nothing. But I saw a picture on the wall of a man with a beard, wearing a flannel. Several other pictures in the hallway of other scenarios of the same man. Different flannels with deer or fish or family. I had not seen a picture of that man, as I had not been anywhere else in the house with a bathroom, nor did I use the bathroom downstairs, because pulling off the hazmat stuff is a pain. As I was securing the house, closing all windows, locking doors and shutting down every light but the front porch light, I saw the front curtain move and again saw the darker than black form in the front window. The last experience I will share in this thread happened mid-July in a very bad area in Detroit. There had been an incident where a guy supposedly tried to abduct a child, was stopped by people in the neighborhood who beat the man very bad, and he escaped to his house where the neighborhood people quickly called police, and civilians surrounded the man's house to prevent escape. The police response time in this area is horrible, and the people were throwing rocks through the man's window and damaged his car. The man was hurt bad by the mob and was hurt by a rock or glass and died in the home. This is assumption by DPD. From what the police officer told me, it was a misunderstanding, and the man picked up a girl that was injured riding her bike, and some kids that knew her told their parents that the man was kidnapping her, and people over reacted, and the man was brutally beaten. The cleanup was pretty simple to do. We secured windows, cleaned up blood and bodily fluid, but as soon as I entered the house, I just felt wave after wave of fear and sadness, like I've never felt this before, and it hit in waves that made my legs weak. My working buddy who was there showed up late and didn't get the story from the cop like I did, but experienced the same feelings I had. The whole time we were there, we saw a form darting around corners, like it was watching us, then hiding. It was similar to like a small bit of fog or mist. We also heard very slight cries for help coming from several areas in the house, and also what sounded like, "Please stop," and long, "No!" A few times, the crowd came back and yelled at the house also, and when this was going on, the activity in the house increased, and we could hear running footsteps go up the stairs, a door slam, and it sounded like the front door would open and close, but we never saw any of the doors move. The path of the footsteps sounded like from the front door, through living room, to the bathroom, to stairs, to the upstairs bungalow room. The part that really got me was I could feel the floor impacts that felt like the vibrations of someone running past me when I was cleaning the areas. And each time I would be hit by one of those waves of fear and sadness. When we left the house, there were a few people on porches hanging out like is usual during summer, and the people were still hostile and yelling random things, but directed at us as we loaded the van and took off hazmat suits. We ignored this, but before we had loaded all the material from the house into the van and locked the house, the front door slammed hard enough to sound like a gunshot, which scared me and my crew member, along with the people on the front porch, to the point where they went inside. The front door deadbolt was somehow locked and we could not get it open. I think it was a different key than the knob, so we ended up leaving several boards in the house that were left over from boarding a few of the windows. The feeling of relief when I left the house was like night and day. Inside I was anxious, scared, paranoid, and just really down, which could be due to knowing the story. But when I got outside, it was like flipping a light switch. I immediately felt better, and me and the other guy in my crew were joking and laughing about dumb stuff and normal 19 and 20-year-old shenanigans. I have many of these stories written down in detail in a journal I started after the first 3 months of working at this job. I talked to the guys on the cruise and got other strange stories from them too. I know that some of this could very well be formed by my subconscious mind to cope with traumatic situations, but some of it has no explanation. And when I hear other members of my crew tell me their stories when they haven't been influenced by mine, that is a horse of a different color. When I have time, I will pull out the journal and give more of my experiences. The job got way worse when I started the journal after 3 months in. Several experiences with what I think was paranormal. Many situations that stressed my mental state to the point where my mask of sanity started to slip. In the end, I worked at this place for almost 2 years, and of my crew, crew all died. 2 from suicides, 1 from drug overdose that could have been intentional, but we will never know. I just know that when these 3 guys, my age, around 19 and 20, started this job, all were normal, well-adjusted guys with no cares in the world other than girls, parties, and working. I watched each one of them slowly drain their joys and passion for life. And I know this sounds bad, but each one that died was considerate enough to die in a clean way. Most likely so another person wouldn't have to see the horrible thing that we all saw so often. When I was 16, my sister and I were walking home for lunch, a half block from the high school. A girl in my younger sister's class was driving someone's car in the parking lot, doing donuts. It appeared the girl in the front passenger seat was scared and wanted out. The door opened and she was pulled under the car. The driver must have thought she was still on top of her and ended up backing over her for a second time. I knew she was dead. Then I saw what looked like refractive light combined with mist or fog. That is the best I can use words we have to describe it. That ascended up just above the car, and then it was gone. My sister ran down to call 911. I was dry heaving in the ditch. I'm extremely sensitive to other people's pain, so witnessing a person run over twice and be gone was overwhelming. I wondered about what I saw a few times that summer. Never told anyone. Didn't think I'd be believed. It was a long faded memory by the time I was in my late 20s. My BFF was driving my car to drop me at SeaTac for a business trip on the old Highway 99 viaduct. We came up on an accident that had just occurred. Motorcycle versus SUV. The SUV was on its side, wheels facing the bay, and a woman was having a panic attack. Another woman was kneeling by the motorcyclist, reaching for a pulse. I saw the same refracted light and foggy but transparent particles move up and away from him, then disappear just as the woman sunk her head down. I interpreted this as no pulse. What could it possibly be but a soul, or a quantum group of particles from the elements of a supernova that gave us life, returning to the fold? This isn't the only experience I've had that didn't have an explanation based on our current understanding of quantum physics, chemistry, biology, or any of the sciences. But it's one I have witnessed twice under similar circumstances. So, it would be difficult to explain it away as a reflection of some light bouncing off metal or other anomalies. A few years ago, I was a university student in Eastern Washington, but dating a girl in Western Washington. I was visiting her for the weekend during the summer when we got into a huge fight around midnight, and I left, deciding to head back to my apartment. I mention this for context as to why I was driving through Snoqualmie Pass after 1 in the morning. I'd never gone through the pass so late before, and what is usually a very busy stretch of freeway on I-90 was completely empty. I went well over an hour without seeing a single vehicle going either way. So naturally, I was driving way too fast. At the time, I had a 73-foot Chevy Nova. It wasn't quite the classic, but it had power and a complete lack of AC. Even though it was late at night, the combination of a warm summer night and the large amount of heat that bled through from the engine meant that I had my windows down and was sweating. Not far into the east side of the mountains, around 1:30, I hit a long stretch of straight road that doesn't have an on-ramp or any way to get into the freeway, when suddenly a set of headlights appeared behind me, something like 200 feet back. I glanced back at the lights, puzzled as to where the vehicle could have possibly come from. I noticed that despite the fact that I was absolutely hauling, the lights were gaining on me. I decided to switch lanes and slow down a bit so it could pass. After a moment, the vehicle, now only half that distance, moved over behind me into the same lane. This is when I began to panic. I'm in the middle of nowhere, hadn't seen another vehicle in over an hour, and now I've got some aggressive driver running up on me. I watched as those lights got closer, 60 feet, 50 feet, 40 feet. In seconds, it was upon me. I braced against the steering wheel, expecting to get rear-ended by a vehicle going much faster than me now. I watched in my rear-view mirror in horror as those headlights blasted right into the back of my vehicle, and suddenly, everything froze. Quite literally. Nothing physically hit me, but the whole vehicle frosted love, and I could see my breath. I hit the brakes and did my best to pull over, despite not being able to see through the windshield. Every hair on my body was standing on end. I got out of my vehicle and paced back and forth, examining my car, which was already starting to defrost as streams of water poured down it. There was no damage to my back bumper, and absolutely no sign of whatever vehicle had hit me. Eventually, I calmed down enough to get back in the car and drive the rest of the way back, wake my roommates, and explain what had just happened. The next time I drove through the area in the daylight, right about where I think the ghost car had hit me, there was a very old wooden cross, somewhat overgrown on the side of the road. As to the location of the cross, I have a few points I'd like to make. The first is that this was years ago, so I do not remember the exact location. The cross itself was difficult to spot. It was very washed out wood. It clearly had writing on it at one time, but it wasn't legible going 70 miles per hour, and there is virtually no shoulder to speak of for pulling over. I spotted the cross several times over the next year, but in my last year living on the east side, I don't recall seeing it anymore. I cannot say with any certainty if it is still there or not, but my gut tells me it's been torn down by the weather and nature. I did attempt to look up any deaths along there and found almost too many stories with no exact locations. I eventually decided that I wouldn't have any real way to determine which one it could be. But I was telling a friend about my experience one night while at the Iron Horse Brewery in Ellensburg, and a random older gentleman on the other side of me piped in that he'd seen it before too. He then finished his drink and left, visibly upset. I wish I could have asked him more about his experience. I grew up in a densely forested rural area in central Virginia, and like most kids my age, 10 at the time of this story, I spent a lot of time playing in and around the woods. My best friend and I had found a creek one day while exploring different deer trails through the woods. This creek we happened on was a very rare find and the perfect spot for us to play. It was wide and deep enough to swim around in and had nice, soft, mossy banks on either side to rest on after we had tired ourselves out. The water was cool and clear, no copperheads and no mosquitoes because the water was constantly running. We were psyched. After a few hours of swimming, we had to walk back home for lunch, but we made plans to pack lunch the next day so we could have a picnic on the creek banks and spend the whole day there. The next morning, we set out for the woods at around 1 p.m., planning to have the picnic first and swim after. We entered at the same spot we had the previous day and followed what we thought was the same deer trail. It was not. At the point where we should have found the creek, we walked into a small clearing that was covered in huge, thick ferns. We had definitely never walked past this before. So, being both hungry and tired of walking, we decided to eat in the clearing. We laughed and played around there for a while, spitting watermelon seeds at each other from our lunch. It was an absolute blast, and we were both in wonderful, giddy moods. That all changed, however, as soon as we packed up and set back out to find the creek. As we walked on, the woods started to feel darker and colder. We got skittish, and I noticed my friend kept whipping her head around to look behind us. After about a half hour of walking, we came up on what looked like an entire overgrown bathroom. The sink, toilet, and bathtub are all arranged together and covered in ivy. It's pretty common to find weird shit like this in the middle of the woods, so we just walked on and made jokes to lighten the mood, calling it Bigfoot's bathroom. After another hour of walking and not seeing anything we recognized, we started to panic. Instead of trying to reach the creek, we were now just trying to find our way back home, or out of the woods at least. I told her we should follow the sun, and eventually we would come up on a road or someone's property where we could find help. She insisted on another way, and we began yelling at each other out of fear, and let's be honest, little girl bossiness. I told her if she thought she was so right, she should just go her way, and we would see who got out first, so we split up. Now, as an adult, I fully acknowledge I was being a stubborn brat, and also an idiot. It was the worst thing we could have done. Not 10 minutes after splitting up, I began to hear someone walking maybe 100 feet behind me. Thinking it was my friend deciding to go my way after all, I slowed down so she could catch up to me. Instead, whatever matched my pace. I slow down, it slows down. I stop, it stops. This went on for hours. The whole time I was going back and forth on whether or not it was in my head or there was really something following me. I picked up a big stick, swung it a few times to make sure it was sturdy if I had to hit someone, and trucked on. As it began to get dark, I came up on something that made my heart sink into my stomach. It was Bigfoot's bathroom. I had just walked in a huge circle for hours, despite being 100% sure I was following the setting sun west the entire time. Confused and frustrated, I sat down on a log and just screamed my little heart out while smacking my whoop-ass stick repeatedly into the ground. As I tried to collect myself, I heard the footsteps again, walking up on me from behind. I called out my friend's name as loud as I could. No answer. Then, after a short pause, the steps began to run towards me. I jumped up and booked it as fast as I could in the opposite direction. Now, this is the truly horrifying part, which I typically omit while telling people this story. As I was sprinting through the darkening woods, I began to hear what I thought were church bells. I looked up to see the darkest, deepest cloud I have ever seen in my life. In the middle, it was so black, it was like looking into the night sky, and the dark grey around it seemed to be swirling. It gave me a horrible feeling to look at, almost like the nausea you get when looking through binoculars for too long. What sickened me further was that I realized the sound of the bells was coming through the hole in the cloud. They were deafeningly loud. I mean really booming out of this thing. When I realized this, I stopped dead in my tracks. I felt a sense of absolute and overwhelming dread that has gone unmatched in all my 24 years on this planet. Something in my head began screaming that if I did not run away from whatever the hell that cloud was, no one would ever see me again. I would be gone. I did not want to run toward the thing chasing behind me either, though, so I made a sharp right and took off away from both. It was now completely dark, and I was running blind through the woods, smacking through branches, wheezing and tripping every few feet for what seemed like another hour, until I smacked into something low and flew over it, hitting the ground so hard all the air in my lungs was knocked out of me. As I lay there trying to recover, I realized I couldn't hear the bells anymore. Then my eyes adjusted more to the dark, and I realized what had just made me go ass over teeth was an old fence. Grabbing hold of it, I prayed it would lead me to a farm, and sure enough, it did. I walked up over a hill about a mile to the back of the farmhouse, explained what had happened, and the farmer graciously gave me a ride back home. I was covered head to toe in scrapes, oozing blood, and more exhausted than I had ever been in my life. But I was finally safe. It was past 9 p.m. when I finally walked through my front door. My friend had gotten back shortly after we split and figured I had as well, so I hadn't told anybody I was lost, and my family just figured I was still out after dark, which wasn't uncommon for me. They were shocked when I walked in, beat up and crying. Nobody had been looking for me at all. To this day, I wonder how long they would have waited to come find me if I hadn't been lucky enough to find the fence, and if it would have been too late. Please show your support by subscribe to our YouTube channel and like the video. This really helps us a lot. I upload daily horror stories, so make sure to press the bell icon.